Death is not just an ending. Sometimes it's a teacher. Welcome to Death Stories Living Truth with Janae of Living Truth. Here, we listen to stories that transform people, near-death experiences, final moments, spiritual awakenings, grief journeys, and the truth discovered at the edge of life itself. This space is for the seekers, the healers, the grieving, the curious. Welcome home, soul travelers. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Death Stories Living Truth. This is Janae with the Living Truth, and today's episode is At the 1090. It's from At the 1090 podcast. Now let's get going.
I'm here because I lost my precious daughter almost 3 years ago due to fentanyl. Jayla was a 9-pound baby. She was my biggest child that I had to birth. She was always energetic, somewhat shy, but she always stood out. She was the baby of the house. She was the youngest of my 3 children. So we always pacified her because she was the youngest. My daughter loved boxing. She loved, as she got older, of course, she loved beauty. She loved to wear makeup. She loved to do her hair. She loved to put on clothes. Typical things teenage girls like to do. My children always went to my last 2 children have always went to an all-girls school. And then eventually I sent them into a co-ed school. From there, I believe the sudden change of environment in the school kind of like took my daughter on this roller coaster of change. I've noticed that Jayla took a liking to boxing. I guess she felt like she needed to be able to protect herself. Um, and our and my kids' upbringing, we've always lived in very challenging areas where protection is one of the main things that you have to kind of like take under your wing for safety. Kids could be pretty cruel sometimes. Jayla was kind of a rather a thick girl in some times of her life. And I'm sure kids probably made some mean gestures of teasing. And so, of course, it took my daughter to being more physical with some of the children because of that. And I think that, the boxing came as a way of Jayla coping with some of the everyday pressures that she had to deal with where we were actually living. Even though she had a lot of bumps and bruises throughout her short time here, she always, you know, made it her business to, absolutely determined to never stop and never quit. My daughter had a time period in her life where she actually ran away from home. My daughter still never missed school. She still was going to school. She still was making it through. A lot of people quit. So for a child to be determined, you know, to continue going on and fighting for, you know, the finish line to me was pretty impressive. She had her challenges in school. Jayla, pretty much towards the end of her life, she was determined to graduate. That was really important to her. no matter what. I mean, my daughter, during COVID, of course, the kids had to virtually, do school at home on a computer, which was very challenging because unfortunately, just like in class, some of these kids misbehave online as well. But, my daughter got up every day consistently on time. I never really had to like scold her about getting online or anything like that. And I'm only speaking this about the schooling towards the end because this is like towards the end of her life. But she was definitely determined. She definitely wanted to have her bragging moment about, hey, I got my diploma. And that made me very proud of her. So she did very well at school. As my daughter got older, I changed my daughter from an all girls school to a co ed school. I began to see changes in my children, behavior wise. Number one, what I did notice is that it was a little bit on noticing things, of course, these kids in this time, a lot of these kids are introduced to marijuana. It's like the thing to do. I started noticing some things just with the patterning of, how they would come in the house, how they would look, may have even smelt, you know, some of the residue of marijuana. So, things just began to unravel for the worse when my children started getting up in age. Of course, at that time, me being a single parent, I took on a very huge role and responsibility of getting into politics. I was such a go getter and fighter, not just for my home, but it began to surface on the outside of my home, whereas though I was being really responsible for a lot of my community. A lot of the members of my community outside of just my home. So, with that being said, I feel like with all that I had going on, it could have allowed my children a little bit more space, I'll say, to do a lot more things or get involved with a lot more things that I can say that was introduced or taught to them in the home. One thing about me, I always instill values within my children to try to keep them on a straight path and straight track of just being obedient to my rules and not to be, you know, out there like wild children, considering, the fact that we live in a very challenging area with a combination of drugs, crime, gun violence. Try to keep your kids on a clear path. Unfortunately, I feel like the streets were able to swallow my children with influence, which greater, much, much greater than the influence in the house. I think sometimes people don't, or parents don't realize the influence can be anywhere. I don't care if you live in the White House to the poorhouse. Influence on the outside, social media, peers, peer pressure. It could be your neighbor who could be a bad influence for all we know. Influence come in so many different ways. And you cannot feel like you're above and beyond any of this, when it comes to the youth. Children, at a very young age, their minds are like sponges. They pretty much pick up everything. The school that my children went to up until maybe the fifth or sixth grade, they pretty much started out with those same children from kindergarten. So when they broke away from those children and went to a whole different school, you had a combination of children from all over the District of Columbia. Of course, they were not familiar with a lot of them. Maybe one or two probably, travel along with them to the school that they actually enter into. But I just think it just had a change of I guess the attitude just started changing and the behaviors. I just noticed as they were not only getting older, but just with the change of the location of they went to school. That was just when I could say I started seeing the changes. Children are basically, and this goes pretty much across the board, they are more so hypnotized by influence. Like, it's all about being in. And when I say being in, like, what's cool, what's considered to be cool, what's considered as being accepted. And the problem that we have out here in this world is that a lot of adults deal with this too. People want to be accepted. A lot of times, people kind of sway into a direction of doing things that maybe they shouldn't, or, just out of curiosity, they get themselves involved with. I just feel like my daughter just was too trusting. You have to realize my daughter came up under my raising as a mom. And my daughter only sat back and watched a lot of how I cared and nurtured my community. A lot of what I didn't allow or didn't approve of, their friends' moms were allowing it. So I looked like the bad person. I looked like the mean mother, you know. But in all reality, it was just that me as a mom, I am making sure that I protect my children at all costs. And that is to make sure that they understood that all smiles that come before you are not your friend. It's really weird because before my daughter passed, at that particular time, I was a commissioner for the DC area. And of course, we're like most politicians in our area, we found out a lot of things much quicker than any other constituent in the city. There was information circulating about this fentanyl that possibly could have been floating around and pretty much alerting us to tell our constituents to be a little bit more cautious and, let people know that there is this stuff floating around in our city. I didn't feel threatened by it when I heard about it because I didn't have any clue that my daughter was involved in anything like this. However, people that I was aware of that had children that were dipping and dabbing into alternative drugs, to get high, I informed them to be more on a lookout or alert for this beast named fentanyl, only to find out later that this very beast that I was alerting other people about was going to hit my home. Excuse me, June the 22nd, 2021. It's at that moment when I felt in my heart that this animal had hit my home. I don't know, it's like I instantly, something come over me that said, I believe your daughter got hold of some fentanyl. Something terrible has happened. When I located my daughter that morning, she had foam coming out of her mouth. Her skin had begun to, she was a little warm, not exactly cold, so I'm not really clear on how long she was departed from me, but I knew something was wrong. As I go back into memory on that day, I probably had a scream the whole block probably heard. That's how that's how hard it hit me when I found my daughter.
Summer between his freshman and sophomore year. So he played high school ball. He's playing on.
I'm not sure what happened to my daughter.
Kind of with all the same high school
as
boys,
far
the
as
high school
her
coaches. We still just travel
coming
to
in
tournaments.
contact with what has taken her life. But I will say
both the boys. So one cool thing about our
to my knowledge, I've never known my daughter to
Grace's team was made up of a bunch of big brothers.
Been a drug
My
user.
younger boys' team, Kale.
I've never known her to come in contact
His
ever
team
with
was
fentanyl
like the little brothers. So
before the time of her death.
We all got to travel all these tournaments together, and then it's like chaos
It's
once we
still
get
a
there
mystery
usually
to
because
me
the boys are at different fields
as to what has occurred up to the moment of my daughter's death.
This weekend
I'm
we were
not
up
sure
in
of
Evanston,
who she came in
and the
contact
boys for
with,
the first time,
who
literally
gave
ever,
her
the boys are at the same fields,
this
like back to
drug,
back.
how this drug
We can watch
ever
all the boys
came
at the same
about
time. It
to
was
her.
amazing.
I don't have any answers.
So both teams did
The
great.
police
Grace's
came into
team
my home.
took second.
They
I can't remember what they
confiscated her phone.
I want to say third, but
They took my daughter out the house.
So when the older boys were done playing,
As far
we
as
got
I'm
all the brothers
concerned,
together, and we
I
have
don't feel
a
like
picture of
there
all the
was
big
a
brothers and all the
thorough
little brothers in their
investigation.
uniforms together on the field.
It was
one of my
almost to
favorite
me like
pictures ever still.
they waited on the
The
autopsy.
last time that they were all together.
The findings came forward as to how she,
Home.
or what was found in her system, and that pretty much was like, oh, okay.
Beat. He was
And
the
that was
catcher,
that.
so and it was like 95
I just
degrees
talked
up
to the
there, so he's
detective
just
this year,
exhausted. So I'm like, well,
maybe just over a
drink some
month
water,
ago, and
take
I
some
said,
ibuprofen,
well,
like sleep it off. We'll
is this
have a
it?
lazy day tomorrow.
He said,
Be fine.
yes, that's pretty
Not our
much
first
it.
tournament, like, but it's fine.
I don't feel like
So that's what he did. Sunday
people
morning,
that was
he
around
woke
my
up
daughter
and
the
he's
day
like, I just don't
before,
feel good. Just tired. I'm like, well, we don't have anything to do.
the day of, I don't feel
lounge
like
on
they
the
pulled
couch all
no
day.
one down there to
Him
investigate
and I, he was
or question
super
them,
cuddly. He's my only kid that was like real
which I
cuddly,
thought
and
was
he's bigger
terrible.
than me, so he just
I'm
piled on
really
top of me, and
clueless
he's like 6
as
feet
to
tall, so he's just
what had occurred,
piled on top of me.
particularly because, again, I don't even know who my daughter was around. I don't know if she could have just met someone that day. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really don't know. So I feel like if they would have put their best foot forward and did
I
a thorough
don't believe that's on
investigation
accident.
and
I do
kind of
believe that is
some of the
angels.
people that were around her
I
before
do
she
believe
was
that is angels and
deceased,
that is God.
I feel like
That
something
makes
would have came out
sure
of it.
that they got to
But
have
no
that
one was called
moment
down.
before he was going to leave this planet.
You know, at this
Before
point,
he was going
everybody
to return to the spiritual world.
should have been an
They got to have that
investigation.
moment together. The brothers
I
got
would
to
have
have
been
that moment
offended if they would have
together.
pulled me down.
And him and his
because I was
mom got to
around her,
have that
right?
moment
So
together.
if it even took them to call me, I wouldn't have even gotten offended. I'd have been like, oh, they're doing their job. But you didn't call no one down for an investigation? No one? Doesn't make sense to me.
Before you leave tonight, take one deep breath with me. Life is fragile, life is sacred, and none of us are promised tomorrow. So say the thing, make the call, forgive the person, live while you still can. Thank you for being here, soul travelers. Good night, and I will see you soon.